Hello, church. This is the second video looking at how Jesus Christ is the true prophet. If you watched our first video, we took a few moments to look at what a prophet does, what the functions of that office were. Here what we're doing is looking at a case study of a prophet in the Old Testament. How did that office function and look like sort of on the ground? The person that we're looking at is the life and ministry of Elijah, who lived around the 9th century BC. He comes on the scene for the first time in the Bible in 1 Kings 17. And what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to sort of be moving at warp speed here, but we're going to be looking at 5 scenes from Elijah's life just to get a sense of who he was, what he did, and how he accomplished that work of a prophet. After we're going to read a lot of scripture here, but after each section I'll make a few comments. Really what I want to do in this video is just sort of put these passages in front of you, and you can feel free to use your own study Bible, your own research tools to go back and study these passages more. But I really just want to sort of take that 30,000 foot overview of Elijah's life. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Like I said, we've got a lot of ground to cover here. We'll start with his entrance onto the scene in 1 Kings 17. Here's what we read there. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." That's when Elijah first comes on the scene. Here's the context of his entrance and the beginning of his ministry. We know that Ahab was a wicked king of Israel. Commentator R.G. Lee there has that great quote that Ahab was the vilest toad to ever squat on the throne of Israel. He was truly a wicked king that we see throughout the Bible. And we also know that there was a lot of pagan idol worship going on in Israel, worshiping the god Baal, who was the god of rains and storm. And so really think about that, knowing now that Baal was known to be the god who brought rain and storm. Elijah's words on the scene is that God is going to keep it from raining all of these years except by the word of Elijah. So even his first scene is sort of a polemical showdown with Baal, with this foreign false god. We see here a contrast between Elijah, who's a good prophet, who's predicting this drought, and Ahab, this wicked king. Scene 2 of what we're going to look at is this actual showdown, this very well-known scene of Elijah and the prophets of Baal in 1 Kings 18. As you can see there, we're reading 17 through 29 and then 36 through 44. This is the showdown with the prophets of Baal. Here's what we read. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "It is you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Jezebel is the wicked queen. So Ahab sent all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, "It is well spoken." So you get a sense of the showdown that's about to happen, right? The prophets of Baal are going to try to get their God to act here, and Elijah is going to try to get his God to answer. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it." And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice, and no one answered, and they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." Some sort of cutting sarcasm from Elijah there. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with sword and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. Great passage here. We can draw cultural comparisons to our own time, can't we? Of false god worship and sort of the hysteria that follows the worshiping of false god. Really what we see here is similar to today, right? The people have two choices. You can either follow these false gods or you can worship the one true God of the universe. We can't be lukewarm and sort of having our foot in both camps. Elijah says that. Jesus himself will say that centuries later, right? No one can serve two masters. And then we see Elijah mocking these other prophets here. These prophets who are working themselves up in this religious frenzy of activity, but it's not true worship, and so it doesn't count for anything. Let's keep reading verse 36. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offerings of the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God." And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let no one of them escape." And they seized them and brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. 41. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the rushing of rain." What an amazing story, even in the little details. We think about the imagery there of the fire that came down from God, licking up the water around the altar, as if to say that it not only consumed Elijah's offering, but the offering to Baal as well, and took away all of the water around, as if to say God is more powerful than this false god of rain and water that you have spent so much time worshiping. And then even here in the conclusion of this story, where Elijah, now that God has won this showdown, of course, with this false god, here comes the sound of rushing rain, because God is sending rain upon the land again, because he is the true God who is able to do that. Amazing story, lots of things that we can pull through there. But think about, we're looking at Elijah himself here, this role of prophet. How he speaks, how he stands between God and man, speaking the truth of God to the people of God. How he performs mighty works, how God performs mighty works through him in the showdown with Baal. We really see a great picture of what it is that a prophet does. One commentator, J. Sidlow Baxter, said this: "Here is the Martin Luther of old-time Israel, who single-handedly, challenged the whole priesthood of the state religion and all the people of the realm to the decisive test on Mount Carmel." We see here the role that Elijah played in showing and speaking the truth that the God of Israel was the one true God of the universe. Let's keep reading here, this next scene that we're going to look at. What's interesting here is this is 1 Kings 19. This is right after the showdown with the prophets of Baal. Here's what happens with Elijah. King Ahab told Jezebel, again, she's the wicked queen, all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." That is, she's going to kill him. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. Let me pause there. take a moment to think about, Elijah was not a perfect man. The fact that he's running from Jezebel here should be pretty crazy to us after what he just witnessed God do in this scene prior. He had this showdown with the 450 prophets of Baal where he boldly stood for the truth and righteousness of God. Here he's running because someone has threatened his life. He runs away. There he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He repeats himself. He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, you can see here, he sends them to go and call these other prophets, Elisha and a couple others. You see the promises of God there. Again, what's happening here is a surprising reaction from Elijah. But we're just like this, aren't we? We see the power of God. We see God act powerfully in our life. And then maybe sometimes the next day, maybe the next hour, it's like we forget what we have just seen God do. What God does here with Elijah is he sort of puts him on the shelf for retirement. There's going to be no more showdowns with the prophets of Baal. And the role of prophet is going to pass on from Elijah to Elisha. In fact, Elijah goes on as we read and finds Elisha. He does not find, as far as we know, the other two people that God told him to find. And so we get some color here to the character in the story of Elijah. He's a flawed man, deeply a man of faith. He loves God, but he's also, in some ways, depressed by the world that he finds himself in. And the world has surely beaten him down for standing in the role and office of the prophet. Elijah wants to see revolution come. He wants what happened with the prophets of Baal. He wants God to be doing that all of the time. He wants God to be vindicated and victorious in power and glory. Not unlike the apostles of Christ, actually, in the New Testament. We know that God doesn't work like that. God goes according to his own plan, his own timing. And so Elijah is not going to get to see this great godly revolution happen like he had hoped. He wants God to act in fire and miracle and have mighty works done, and God just isn't going to do that in Elijah's time. A couple more scenes here. 2 Kings 2, this is Elijah and Elisha walking together. And as they still went on and talked, behold, the chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, and Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. What an amazing way for Elijah to go, right? I think one thing that we see here, we see a couple things that God is doing. Number one is that we might say God doesn't leave his soldiers on the battlefield. That is, he doesn't use us, and then whenever he's done using us, throw us away. He deeply cared for Elijah, even though Elijah's time of prophecy had passed. He goes and gets Elijah in a really spectacular and mighty way that Elijah wanted to see, right? Elijah wanted to see whirlwind and fire. And for some reason, in God's gracious love and mercy and compassion, he decides to take Elijah that way, to take him up in whirlwind and fire, as if to say, Elijah, you are right to desire this, but it's going to be done in my time. God's saying, look, I am going to accomplish this revival that you are desiring, but but I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to do it in the way that you expect it. Again, that's so true for us today, isn't it? God is going to accomplish his purposes. He's going to accomplish many of the good things that we're praying for and hoping for, but he does it in his way. Another quote here from J. Sidlow Baxter. His imminence is seen both in the religious reformation that he wrought and in the fact, this is Elijah, and in the fact that the New Testament speaks of him more often than any other Old Testament prophet. Moreover, it was he who was chosen to appear with Moses at our Lord's transfiguration. And further, it is from this point that the ministry of the prophets in the two Hebrew kingdoms becomes more prominently emphasized. One of Israel's most startling and romantic characters, he suddenly appears on the scene as the crisis prophet with thunder on his brow and tempest in his voice. He disappears just as suddenly, swept skywards in a chariot of fire. Between his first appearing and his final disappearing lies a succession of amazing miracles. That really is the life and role of Elijah the prophet. But Baxter alludes there to one final scene that we see with Elijah, doesn't he? It's not just what we see there in him being swept up. That's not the end of Elijah's story. In fact, we see Elijah one more time in the New Testament. In Luke 9, this is the transfiguration of Christ. Here's what we read, starting in verse 28. Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory in the two men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. As he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. Now, this is an amazing passage. We have plenty of things that we could say about what this passage means overall for our understanding of Jesus, for what it means for us as Christians. But as we look at Elijah's life specifically here, one question that we might have is, what is Elijah doing here? Why is he on the mountain with the transfigured Jesus and with Moses and with the apostles? I think one answer that I think is a fair answer and a good answer is that Moses and Elijah are there because they represent the law and the prophets, and Jesus is the culmination of both of those things. The law and the prophets find the person they're seeking in Jesus. That's absolutely true. But I also think there's something going on here to a lesser extent, similar to what we saw with Elijah being drawn up in the chariot of fire. And that's that Elijah wanted to see the face of God. He wanted to see revival come in fire and whirlwind, and glory and might that can only come from God. Going back to that scene in 1 Kings 19, when Elijah is fleeing from Jezebel and he's hiding in the cave, he wants to see the face of God, and he can't see it then. But now, 1,000 years later, he's standing on this mountain, and he gets to see that very thing, doesn't he? He gets to look in the face of the transfigured Christ and see the very face of God. More than that, he gets to see the face of the one through whom this great religious revival is going to happen. Again, I think a lesson here, a practical lesson, is that God doesn't just use up his servants and then whenever he's done with them, discard them. But rather, he is compassionate and he cares deeply for us, and he allows Elijah to see, look, this is why this revival didn't come in your time. This is how I was working it out in my own time. And it's through my son, Jesus Christ, through whom all of this is going to happen, all of those things that you were hoping and waiting to see. Again, Elijah is referenced many times throughout the New Testament, but that's sort of the last that we see of him until we see him one day in heaven. Those are 5 sketches, 5 snapshots from Elijah's life. Lots of amazing things there, right? What amazing Bible stories those are. But more than that, what an amazing picture of what it means to be a prophet of God, to foretell and forthtell, to speak of things that will come to pass, but also to speak the truth that can only come from God towards the people of God. There's a lot of things for us to think about. Let's take a few moments and celebrate the gift of Elijah that God gave to his church. But let's also, again, continue to think about what exactly it is that prophets do and how it is that Christ is the one true prophet. That's what we're going to look at in the 3rd video of this series. How is Jesus the true prophet, even a better, more true prophet than Elijah? We'll see you then.